Hodge, and tonight I will be your moderator as we address the economic impact of the current geopolitical climate. Before we get into tonight's show, a few housekeeping matters. Firstly, let me congratulate the Pink House Panthers on their three-peat victory at today's ALHCS Inter-House Sports Day. I know it is our collective hope, at least that of the APM, that this year marks the final year that our athletes are competing at the James Ronald Webster Park in hopes that our professional track is completed in time for next year's sports day. Also, I know a number of you were hoping that tonight's show would have featured the ladies of APM. I mean, you have me, but we were hoping to do a show with the APM ladies. However, given the impending economic challenges likely to be faced as we navigate the uncertain global impacts, we have decided to pivot to bring you a panel of experts to help us better understand what a measured response should look like, both locally and regionally. So tonight, I am joined and will be joined as the night progresses by my APM colleagues and some specially invited guests. So we have my APM colleagues who are all members of the parliamentary opposition, former Premier and Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Health, Dr. Ellis Lorenzo Webster, former Minister of Infrastructure and Tourism, Mr. Hayden Hughes, and former Parliamentary Secretary and Ministerial Assistant with responsibility for youth and sport, Mr. Merrick Richardson. We are also joined by our special guest, Mr. Byron Campbell of Grenada. And Mr. Campbell is a development consultant specializing in project management and rural development with a focus on youth and agriculture. He is a farmer and a mediator connected with the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, and he is the host of a weekly current affairs program, MTV Community Forum. We also have on the line with us Mr. Patrick Hanley, and Mr. Patrick Hanley is no stranger to any of us. Mr. Hanley served as a financial advisor to the former Honorable Chief Minister and Minister of Finance, Mr. Hubert Hughes, during the 2010 to 2015 AUM administration. Later, we will be joined by Mr. Peter Wickham of Barbados. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the show. Let's jump right into it.
Good evening, and it's my pleasure to be here with you to share in this issue and this conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Dr. Webster, I will open the floor for you to begin the conversation and then we'll jump into some questions.
I too want to say good evening as well, Grenada. Good evening to you and to all of my fellow colleagues here on the call this evening. It's a pleasure to be here joining with you, and thank Williams both at home and abroad who are tuned into this program. I bid you good night as well. And I'm looking forward to certainly an entertaining and a fruitful discussion this evening on the issues, both local and geopolitical issues that are affecting our region and our world.
I would like to say good evening to all. And certainly, as our custom is, we start with a word of prayer. So please indulge me as we bow our heads and ask God to join us in this event. Father in heaven, I want to thank you for today and for the blessings you continue to bestow upon us, especially for our beloved Anguilla. We thank you for this program, APM Online. We thank you for all the participants. We thank you for our guests who have so graciously joined us, and ask that the words and wisdom they impart would benefit us all, not only in Anguilla, but throughout the region. I want to thank you for each one of us, open our hearts and our minds, and be with our listeners, Anguillians at home and abroad, that they get a better understanding of where Anguilla is and where it should be. Thank you. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So I want to say, thank you. This is our second show. I want to thank Brother Campbell and later on Brother Wickham. Certainly, Patrick Sheriff Handley, he is familiar, and all our participants, we continue to try to enlighten and certainly to give some insight as to where Anguilla is and what is possible. And tonight, I think, will be very fruitful. I want to thank our moderator, Ms. Gleneva Hodge. And so, having given the welcome, I would, turn it over back to you so others can introduce themselves. Thank you.
All right, so yes, we will begin with some introductions. So, Mr. Campbell, we'll start with you.
Fine, thanks. Well, first of all, as I said earlier, really it's my pleasure to participate in this discussion and this exercise. I thank the host for inviting me. I think the topic is a very topical one. It's real and it's going to affect us in a big way. I just want to start off by saying that we are living in a time where global conflict is no longer a geographical contained, it's no longer geographical contained, particularly for small island developing states like yours and ours. We may be far from the battlefield, I say, but we are firmly inside the economic blast zone, if I can call it that. We are now experiencing what I call imported instability. And I'm taking a regional approach to start with, yes. Every escalation in global tension, whether it is in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or rising US-China rivalry, did this translate almost immediately into higher fuel prices, rising food cost, increased pressure on already and increased pressure on our already fragile economies. Let us be clear here, and this is important. The Caribbean, us, we import as much as 80 to 90% of our food and up to 95% of our energy. That's where we are located. That means we are not just vulnerable, we are structurally very exposed. When oil prices rise and electricity goes up, when grain prices rise, the cost of basic items like bread, like eggs, follows. And for many households where up to half of their income is spent on food, this is not just inconvenience, it is extreme hardship. At the same time, our economy depends, and most of us, lots of our economy depends heavily on tourism, a sector that is highly sensitive to global uncertainty. We have higher airfares, reduced travel demands, and economic slowdowns in North America and Europe can quickly translate into fewer visitors and decline in revenues for us. So it's a big deal. And all of this is happening while we face an ongoing climate crisis. Let's understand this also. And I'm talking about hurricanes, droughts, extreme weather. This is real. So we are managing two overlapping, I say, shocks: geographic, geopolitical, and environmental, which with limited fiscal space and high debt levels in most of our small islands, certainly. The critical issue, therefore, is not just our vulnerability, but it has to do with our dependence. So if we are serious about resilience, we must move beyond rhetoric. Food security must become a national priority. And as a farmer myself, I'm saying this because I see this every day. Energy transition is no longer optional for us. It is essential. Regional cooperation through CARICOM must deepen. This is a big deal for us, particularly in procurement and in production. And we must invest in local capacity, agriculture, fundamental agro-processing, and of course the digital economies. This is important so that we can reduce our exposure to the external shocks that we are experiencing. So in short, small island states must shift from being passive recipients of global shocks to becoming active managers of our own resilience. Because in a world increasingly defined by instability, survival will not depend on size. Not on size, and this is important, but on our strategy. So this is my opening salvo. This is basically the general view that I want to see. But as I said, this is very important for us to discuss the whole question of our, and I see a linkage, the whole question of our, the geopolitical issues, how it affects our economies and our livelihoods, but also the climate change that is also a major fact for us. Thank you. Yes, thank you. This is where I want to.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I will invite Mr. Hanley to give us some opening remarks.
Yes, I think Mr. Campbell pretty much touched on on everything. He, was very wide-ranging in his commentary. But I certainly agree with him, as a small island developing state, Anguilla, and certainly many of the islands around the region fall into that category as well. Because we are so small, we suffer from, high transportation. In many instances, costs a lot for us to get goods to us because we don't produce a lot of the goods that we consume. So we have to import these items. We have the limited economic diversification. Again, no economies of scale. We are very, susceptible to external shocks because we are small, open economies. So, these factors will always hinder smaller states because we just don't have the capacity. We don't have the land in many cases. We don't have the capital. So it means that everything that happens in smaller societies will impact us more. Because of high cost of transportation means the goods that we import will cost more. Lack of economies of scale. If we have to build, let's say, a mile of road in Anguilla circumstances, we have about 5,000 people to pay for that mile of road, as opposed to, the bigger developing states. If they have to build a mile of road, they literally have millions of people to pay for it. So everything costs more in these smaller developing states, and that's a reality of living, in a small state. We have to take these things into consideration. But high debt will always be an issue for us because, again, small populations will lead to high debt. As I said before, limited diversification because we don't have the people, on ground to really diversify into the areas that we want. Limited opportunities for our youth. And when we have limited opportunities, it means that our youngsters don't see a bright future, and some of them have to emigrate to other countries, which further exacerbates the problem in smaller societies. But I think one of the challenges that we as a small states have failed to grasp and to realize is that there's unity in there's strength in numbers. As a region, I've been monitoring what's been happening in the region over the last couple of months, where we've seen what's happening in CARICOM, for example, what's happening in Cuba, the situation down in Venezuela, and we seem to not understand that if we really and truly want to be a force to reckon with, we have to come together. We cannot allow, first world economies to divide us and deal with us on a one-on-one basis. We have to come together as a true CARICOM nation, a Caribbean community, and say, look, we're not dealing with Jamaica versus the US or Guyana versus the US. Let us all join together. And when we join together and we, realize our collective strength, then we will, vote as a bloc, or we will put our case forward as a bloc and not as individual small territories, because we will never win that battle. The United States is obviously of 350 million um, people living in our country. They join together, in the United States, United Kingdom. They've joined, with other countries to come together because they realize the value in joining together. Europe, they realize the value in coming together. But for some reason, we in the region, we believe that we can go it alone. And even though we have a quote unquote um, regional grouping, the regional grouping isn't functioning, isn't operating in the way that it was intended. It was, we're allowing ourselves to be picked off individually. And if we truly want to make headway, we have to join together in a truly homogeneous way and don't allow folks to break us apart. What's happening in Africa? Africa is a very populous um, continent, but because they are so divided, they can't realize the true benefits, even though they have the natural resources in the ground. They still, because they haven't yet figured out how to join together and to become one unit, they are being exploited. And we need to learn from these things and realize that, if we don't join together, especially in the geopolitical issues that's happening around the world today, we realize that we don't have to be in the direct line of fire. But because we depend so heavily on these external markets, that when they sneeze, we are catching pneumonia. So it's important that we understand we really can't do it alone. We have to join together. And if we really want to succeed, we really want to really, put our hands up. It can't be us doing it individually. It has to be a joint effort, a truly coming together of the CARICOM community where we speak with one voice and don't allow ourselves to be segmented. We are still small in the grand scheme of things, but I think we need to broaden our horizons. I was saying to someone the other day that there are 7 billion people in this world. America has what, 350 million, of those people. There's a vast world out there. If we continue to think, and this is for CARICOM as a whole, continue to believe that America holds our future, the United States holds our future, then we would have lost the plot. We have got to start thinking, well, if America isn't willing to play ball, there are other regions in the world who have much more people, a much larger market that exists outside of the Americas, that we can focus on. But if we're not willing to change our mindset, we're going to be forever mired in small island mentality, where we believe that, oh, we can't do it if we were to upset America, that's the end of us. Thinking that America is not the only country in the world. There are much more people outside of America who we can turn to, we can create bilateral relations with, but we still are kind of myopic in my view as it relates to how we view geopolitical issues. We've got to start thinking outside the box and start saying, there's a lot of people in this world, and America forms a very, very small part of that entire population. And if we were to at least get that mindset. First of all, I think we could go a long way into moving forward, into charting our own course and our own destiny, and stop thinking that our fate, lies in whoever sits in the White House, for 4 years. It shouldn't be like that. We should be looking to partner with any and everyone, as long as our values are aligned. But again, as small island states, we will always have our challenges, but and those challenges will not go away if we continue facing those challenges alone. We have got to, ensure that CARICOM does what it was intended to do, which was to, join our small states together as one block. And when we speak, we should be speaking as a block and not just as an Antigua or a Barbados or a Jamaica. Until we get that in our mindset, we are going to struggle.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hanley. And I know we can really get into the role of CARICOM and regional unity as we navigate these times, and we'll get into a little bit of that. Let me apologize if you are hearing what may sound like some bombs going off in my background. If you know, I live in the tourism belt, and there's some fireworks that are going off. So if you're hearing that in the background, no, not in Iran, not but that is what you might be hearing in my background. Turn over really quickly to Mr. Hughes, just some brief remarks, and we really want to start to get into the meat of the conversation.
Hello, good night, and it's good to be here again, and welcome to all our co persons on this particular panel. I just want to say that a lot of the things that are happening right now, and Patrick touched on it, things are changing rapidly in the world, and there's going to be a major shift coming out of this Iran conflict, a huge shift. I think that China has learned the mistakes of Napoleon Bonaparte. They have learned the mistakes of Adolf Hitler. They have learned the mistakes of the United States of America, where each one of these particular countries, including the mistakes of places like the Roman Empire and so forth, where they have learned that the way to take over and conquer the world cannot be through military force. It must be through diplomacy and economics. And I think coming out of this conflict, there's going to be a new player in the world. I mean, China's already a player, but it's going to be the leading player in the world. It's going to be a dominant player. And just today, Trump lifted sanctions on Iranian oil. That says a lot. He lifted sanctions on Russian oil a couple of days ago. And what Iran is saying is that if you want to trade with oil, you have to buy it not with the petrodollar anymore, but with the petro yuan, which is a Chinese currency. So it's going to be a tremendous shift in the world. And even as it relates to here in the Caribbean, and I know one of the hosts, our panel members spoke about CARICOM coming together as a bloc. But the West Indies Federation was started many years ago. And the first country to pull out of the West Indies Federation was Trinidad, one from 10 leave 0. And today we see almost a fraction of the CARICOM through Trinidad again, that have decided to side with someone who is going to be a temporary fixture and who is overseeing what immense wealth in his own hands, but a devastation of the United States. The national debt of the United States cannot be sustained. Today, the Pentagon asks for $200 billion for the war effort because they run out of munitions. Iran is going to make not only America feel the pain, but it's going to make all of us feel the pain, and we must be prepared for what is to come.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hughes. And quickly, just over to Mr. Richardson for your opening remarks.
Thank you and good evening. I won't stay long on the opening remarks because the gentlemen before me have hit so many angles that they've touched just about everything. But what I would like to say as we start the conversation is that while we look abroad and see what's happening, we as small nations need to all show up our finances and what's happening for us. Administrations, governments need to make sure that they have everything in terms of not just the finances for the country itself, but how are they helping their citizens? If they're not reaching back and helping the citizens come along in these times, because you don't have to be a genius right now to realize we're going to be in for some rough waters in the next few months or maybe even the next few years, depends on how long this war in the Middle East holds out. So governments have to, and I'm talking as well to us here at home, have to start looking internally, not just how to show up and keep government finances strong, but also how we can help people through what we know is going to be a lean time in terms of giving whatever tax breaks and tax credits and or whatever other credits they can give to alleviate what we know is going to be some hard times for especially our most vulnerable.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. And I think you pretty much took us right to where we are going to jump in. We have seen a number of governments across the region announce some measures to bring relief to their citizens. Antigua has spoken about increasing the public servants' salary in the interim by 5%. They are looking at raising the minimum wage from $9 to $11.50, with the goal of taking it to $13 per hour. And I believe they've also
Is that
lessened
EC dollars? Is that EC dollars?
that's EC dollars, Mr. Hughes. Um,
Yes.
and they have lessened their collection of consumption tax on fuel, keeping gasoline at $14.25 a gallon. And in Barbados, we saw where they are going to be capping the VAT on electricity. And during their budget debate yesterday, they announced a number of measures that they're going to be rolling out. Doing duties, the way how they calculate the duties, putting a cap on shipping costs, because as we know, King Ocean and Tropical, they've announced an increase in their shipping rates, major increases in their shipping rates across the region beginning, I believe, April 12th. They said we've already started to see the increase in fuel at the pump. We here have seen it increased. Dr. Webster, if you will, I know a number of these measures, and there are a number of measures that the APM administration implemented during your time in office to bring relief to the people of Anguilla. And there were some ongoing measures that we previously discussed. And these were measures that we considered even outside of a discussion on a global crisis, that we wanted to bring relief to the people. Can you walk us through what some of those measures were and what they look or what we hoped they would have looked like? Sorry, Dr. Webster, you're still muted.
I'm still muted. All right. Thank you for that. Yes, thank you for the question. And I think that, all the panelists have really hit to the core of the matter that we are in for a rough ride. And, back in 2020, when the APM administration came in, we came in at a rough time when essentially our economy was shut down. The country was closed. Tourism, our main industry, was shuttered. We had deficit $97.1 million. We essentially, were relying on the UK to help us. We came in where we were told the public servants had to take a 5% cut. And this is when they basically were carrying the country because they were the only ones working. And the APM administration put in place several measures that included we had to get revenue so that we could have a predictable source of revenue, which was the goods and service tax that had been signed for previously. Now, when we were able to get that predictable revenue, and we were able to meet our basic and essential needs, then we started to find ways to give back to the people. That included the senior shield, the junior shield. That included removing property tax from from homes owned by Anguillians. We were able to then take steps to reduce or remove duties from essential items, which I see Bermuda is now doing, 6 years after us in their budget, or 5 years after us in their budget speech. I saw that they were removing or lowering uh, duties on essential items. We did that back in April of 2023. We also removed GST from all food items. That's the tax. Uh, we were able to give certain, there was no GST on a basic amount of electricity. The first 130 kilowatt hours was not taxable. So these are measures that we started even when things were bad for us and we were trying to get our economy going and recover after COVID. And then we started where we were giving electricity credits, $1,000 to each home, and then $500 to each home for a total of $3,500 over the time that we did per home in Anguilla. That was over 6,000 homes that got that. And then we were able to give food vouchers to those 70 years and older, regardless of your economic status, because we felt that people shouldn't be singled out, that we should just across the board. We also took steps to reduce the bulk fuel levy uh, because we had put in the maximum fuel cost where we got the information from the bulk fuel importers, and we were then able to allow them, a certain profit margin, and then we set the maximum fuel price as government. We felt that was necessary, and now I think other countries in the region are seeing that that is necessary to do to ensure that you could control fuel cost. We wanted now to decrease the bulk fuel levy down to, like around $120,000 instead of the $750,000, which I think would have also reduced the cost of fuel in Anguilla. And we also had the incentive that the fuel would even be further reduced for fishermen who they are helping to provide food security. And we had a very comprehensive and holistic look at the economy. But looking, some of the things that we wanted to do was capping the freight cost that would be calculated in the CIF values that determines what the duties are. And we saw that if we cap what freight would be, then when you do the CF, the cost, the insurance, and the freight, if you kept that freight at a certain amount, you then control what the duty is that would be paid. And this was something we were looking into getting done prior to all this upheaval in the world. And I think that is even more essential now than ever, that we have to do these type of measures to make sure that we can control costs for our people. As Brother Campbell said, we import, over 80% of our food. And we import our electricity because we're importing fuel. Over 90% of that is imported. And so we have to be able to control the import costs so that it's not passed on to our people. Because right now, even though we could consider increasing, the salaries, which is what we looked at for increasing salaries of public servants. And then we were looking at private pension funds so that would ensure that our private workers, such as hospitality workers, that they would be assured that there's a pension after they complete their many years of service. These are all areas that now have to be, taken back up so that we can come up with a plan for people to survive in these times And as Mr. Henley said, there there is no guarantee that this is going to end anytime soon. And we see it escalating throughout the region of the Middle East, but it's also affecting all of us throughout the world. And there's no end in sight. In terms, we also have to make that gigantic leap to getting us, to renewable energy. Because if we were already transitioned there, we'd be relying on the sun or the sun and the wind rather than relying on oil from wherever it's coming from. If we were growing more of our own food, if we had expanded our agriculture like the plan was by former Minister Quincy Gomes-Marie, we would have more food security. And the region had planned on, 25% by 2025. We are now almost in the middle of 2026, and we haven't even scratched the surface yet of getting that number up in terms of reducing our food imports. And so I could go on and talk about the specifics that was in our, we didn't call it our manifesto. This was our essentially our plan for Anguilla had we been re-elected into government. And I think that if we reflect on what we were proposing, including where we were going to reduce the cost of housing for new homeowners and home builders, because we were going to reduce or remove, GST on, building materials and other areas for new homeowners and new home builders. It just shows that sometimes, elections have consequences, and in this case, significant consequences. We in Anguilla, our administration wants to, buy a house in London. $16 million committed to that, plus whatever the ensuing and ongoing costs would be. When we have to become, I think right now, we have to circle the wagon and say, our people who are in Anguilla needs to be first. And there's no reason to be exporting our money, the hard-earned money of the people of Anguilla, to a developed country when we have a country that needs developing and we have a people that need survival. That is what is bothersome to me, that we have lost the plot in Anguilla. We need to make sure that that $16 million is utilized in Anguilla right now to help our people. It cost us, it cost the government, so it cost the people of Anguilla $17 million back in December of 2024 for the APM administration to remove goods and service tax from all food items except alcohol and confectionaries. $17 million. Just think of what now, if we would take that $16 million that has been put in escrow to buy a house in London, if we were to find a way that we can subsidize for our own people, subsidize the freight, subsidize our businesses so that they don't have to be paying the exorbitant electricity fees right now, and they can pass that savings on to the people in Anguilla. If we had not changed the goods and service tax into two new taxes where there is no claim back and there is no way that government could say, let's instead of the businesses having to pay that 9%, they could have gotten it back and somehow incentivize these businesses, including our freight, our shipping companies, help them in a way to defray some of the costs, so that we can keep the cost down to the people of Anguilla. I think we have to get very innovative, and I know that Patrick Sheriff Hanley likes to come up with ways that we can do this, because he's been out there and exposed, in the greater world to some of the things that are done, to make it easier upon the people. Because if we help the people to save $1 now, I think that it will reap great benefit in the future.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Webster. And, I really want to emphasize the choice of the AUF administration to delay the budgeted for increase in public servant salaries, and knowing what that would have done, that increase would have done for a number of people. I mean, half of our population is employed by the public service. And so for them to have had the economic wherewithal with that increase to sort of buffer some of the challenges that we're seeing now, it really does beg the question of the decision making. And so while, yes, we question the decision making, we are here to offer solutions. This is not simply about nitpicking and going after persons politically. But as you say, elections have consequences, and with elections, there comes choices, and there must be accountability. And so, as an opposition, I know that you and Mr. Hughes and Mr. Richardson, you continue to hold them to account, and we continue to do so through these conversations where we say, the people of Anguilla and the public servants, those persons who have held us down with no sort of a pay increase other than the reinstatement of salaries during your administration since 2007, 2008. And we're going to get into that period in a little bit as well. But I think that decision to delay the increase in the salaries is one that is an unfortunate one, and one that hopefully they are going to reconsider in the very near future. I want to jump over to Mr. Campbell, because Dr. Webster, you gave us a lot to chew on and to speak about. And when you spoke about the shipping costs and the freight and all of that. And Mr. Campbell, I know it is your area. When he spoke about food security, I saw you nodding, and that is your area as a farmer, as someone who has worked in rural development and agriculture.
Yeah.
Stepping a little bit out of that just for a second, while we look to individually as countries within the region increase our own food security, there is room for us to do regional trade. Yet we continue to see that there's some difficulty with establishing shipping within the region and really establishing good trade within the region. Why do you think that is?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, thanks. But I just want to go back. I want to make one small point that Mr. Henley made, and I want to say that I strongly support his views on the state of CARICOM, and to just add that we could be only strong. We could only be strengthened if we have collective sovereignty. Individually, we are nowhere, and we will be nowhere. So it has to be a collective, and if we separate it and we behave as individuals, it's not going to happen. So I just want to strengthen that point and to say it's so critical and very important. Yeah, on the question of food security, and again, I want to refer to CARICOM. CARICOM had a plan. They said it was called 25-25, that they will decrease our dependency on food imports by 25% by 2025. Well, it didn't happen. In fact, it worsened, and they had not moved it to 2030. So it's not happening there. And even on the local level, we are not seeing the kind of investments that are required to deal with this critical issue. And so it is not surprising, therefore, that in Grenada, I can tell you that 80% of our foods are imported, $400 million. And we're not seeing the investment, whether it's an agro-process or in the production, to change the situation. But I agree with you that what the region what we're not seeing is the investment and transportation required. And I'm saying that because there is a link there. And we've seen recent initiatives by the region to go to Africa and to see how we could improve our trading with the continent. But we are not focusing on our own situation, our own trading priorities here, because I think that is where we should start first, start at home, because that is where it belongs. Because I heard a colleague talking about the measures that Anguilla took and other countries took to soften the impact, the economic and social impact on the vulnerable persons in our society. And that's good, but that's not always feasible, because if you look at it, many Caribbean states have debt to GDP ratio of between 60 and 100%, So when some governments are forced to subsidize fuel or to support vulnerable households, as I said, but there's limitation. The fiscal space is very limited, Here, for example, in Grenada, we've put a lot of emphasis on our migration policy. And this has been squeezed. We saw only earlier this week where the U.S. has weaponized further visa, where it required upwards of $15,000 to enter into the United States. So it means that these sources of financing, through migration and others, are not. They're fickle. They're not sustainable, in my view. And therefore, is the whole issues of production, how we can be. Look, we came out of COVID, we came out of 9/11, and we saw our vulnerability. Many islands just couldn't get sufficient food and nutritious food to feed ourselves. So we have to make those investments. We are borrowing to survive shocks we did not create. And this is structurally unsustainable. I would rest here for now.
If I may come in here a minute. When I was a purchasing manager at the Cuisinart Hotel many years ago, and even before that, when I was a receiving clerk at the Capjuluca Hotel way back in 1992, one of my observations when we bring all of this produce out of Miami was that a lot of the produce was grown in the Caribbean. You had Haitian mangoes, you had Dominican bananas, etc. But most of the produce that came in on those containers came from different islands in the Caribbean. It was consolidated in Miami and then shipped back to the Caribbean. That was one observation that I noticed in 1992, and then further on as my progression in the hospitality sector went on.
Yeah.
But what I also note is this, some years ago, back in 2011 or 12 or thereabout, I went to Guyana as the parliamentary secretary responsible for tourism on a meeting there. And I asked them on one of the time off, I asked to be able to be taken to the market. And I had never in my life seen such beautiful vegetables and fruits, so full of life and vitality. And the market was so big, I spent probably about 4 hours just walking through that market and just enjoying seeing all those beautiful fruits and vegetables. But every day they would dump them because there's no market. Guyana's an underpopulated country.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked the question to the minister at the time, why is it that we don't have links in the Caribbean where you can provide all of this great produce to the rest of the Caribbean? And it was something that we did not think about. Fast forward to 2025, and it was deemed that Guyana was the only country in the world that was 100% food secure, right? So Guyana has the ability. And what I also noticed back in 2011-12 was that China was buying some great agricultural lands in Guyana to ensure their food security. So the reality is that even in this region, because Guyana is considered part of the Caribbean, even in this region, I know they have found vast wealth in terms of oil, right? But we know, and they're going to make a lot more money right now with oil. And based on what the Prime Minister said, they're going to be really impacting the people in a positive way from this oil. Hopefully that comes to fruition and it can become another Qatar, another Dubai, even though those countries have been decimated and destroyed for our lifetime. They're not going to come back in our lifetime. So the world is going to shift big time. But Guyana, going back to Guyana, and the ability to grow food and produce food, they have the ability to supply us here in the Caribbean with a lot of food and so forth. So hopefully that is something that we can work out. I'm not saying Angola alone, but collectively as a region, we can work with other Caribbean islands to ensure food security. Because those supply routes, you hear about how the Strait of Hormuz have been impacted in terms of fertilizer and what have you. Guyana don't even need fertilizer. The soil is brimming with natural fertilizer. So the reality is that there's a lot of opportunity in the Caribbean for us to secure ourselves, but we just have to do those things, because it goes back to something that our premier said recently when the war broke out. And I thought this was, I was really shocked when she said that a war won't have an impact on Angola, on the people of Angola. And I was really shocked because I know that every single global upheaval, whether it was a war in Iraq or whether it was 9/11, these are man-made disasters. 9/11, I'm not talking about hurricanes. I'm talking about man-made disasters. 9/11, the war in Iraq, the war in Ukraine, all of these things have had an impact on the people of Angola. So I was very surprised at that statement. Hopefully, we can make those linkages with Guyana, and hopefully we can have a revisitation of the way we're thinking in terms of global conflict and how it impacts the lives and livelihood of the people of Angola and the Caribbean.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. I'm really glad that you mentioned Guyana, because if I'm not mistaken, in addition to Guyana being 100% food secure, I think I recall that there was some discussion where Guyana was saying to Caribbean nations, well, come and produce food here with us, and so that you can feed yourselves. So really glad you brought that into the discussion. And kind of, I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Hughes, in terms of that comment from our premier. And I still scratch my head a little bit when I think about it, that the war in Iran would not have an impact on us. One of the first things that we're going to see, and permit me if I'm wrong, but a likely impact to tourism, when we are starting to look at higher fuel costs and jet fuel in particular, which will equate to higher so a couple of things. Let me finish this, because there's a couple of things that I want you to drill down on. The likelihood of higher flight cost, and then to consider, I know that there was a news item this morning where the tourist board, they mentioned the $3 million economic impact from the introduction of Bermuda Air. And we know that Angola has been and will continue to pay for seats on Bermuda Air, because they cannot be filled. And one second, Mr. Hughes, permit me to come back to you. Just allow me one moment to welcome Mr. Wickham. We've been joined by Mr. Wickham, and allow me to say good night, and then we'll get back into the conversation.
Okay, good night. Good to be with you. Sorry to be late.
That's okay. So we'll
Okay,
come back to Mr. Wickham in a moment. So back, Mr. Hughes, as I was saying, one of the questions that I've had in noticing that, and in recognizing that there's going to be higher airfares, is whether or not there's a set rate that Angola is paying for these open seats on Bermuda Air. Is it that we're paying market price for those? And will that eat into any positive gain that we've gotten from Bermuda Air? Your take, Mr. Hughes?
I'll say this. The government of Israel have placed extreme censors on any information coming out of Israel relating to the war. The government of Angola have placed extreme censors on any information related to the Bermuda Air Agreement. So, we don't know. But what I can say this about Angola's tourism product, I don't see a significant impact, negative impact on Angola's tourism product from the stay over tourists. The day trippers, yes, that's going to have an impact on the day trippers that comes from St. Martin, because St. Martin caters to a different type of clientele. But the clientele that we cater to make a lot of money in global conflict, make a lot of money when the markets turn down. There are people who profit significantly from global conflict. We have people who profit significantly from fluctuations in the market, and those are the people that come to Angola. And so I don't see us having a real negative impact in terms of our stayover tourists. I can see it even growing. And the reason why I see it growing as well is because people always have the desire to travel, whether it was Marco Polo or Christopher Columbus, even though they were exploiters and dangerous individuals, people always have this desire to travel. And we know for sure that a part of the world is now cut off. A part of the luxury segment of the world is decimated, and it's going to be decimated for 10, 15, 20 years. And that is Dubai, Qatar, even Saudi Arabia, that was investing over $1 trillion in developing their tourism product, a luxury tourism product to compete with Dubai. They have decimated. And they had lifted a 76-year ban on the drinking of alcohol in Saudi Arabia to cater for this tourism market that they were diversifying into. So we are positioned great for tourism because we don't do mass cruise tourism. We do a lot of high-end. We have a significant inventory of high-end villas, people paying $10, $15, $20, $30,000 a night, US plus taxes, And so I see more people coming to Angola and doing stayovers rather than other options. So in terms of tourism, I still feel bullish on our tourism product, even though fluid prices are going up, because the reality is that a lot of people who even visit Angola are jet setters. They fly in their own private jets, right? So fuel is no consequence to them. A lot of them who come to the region are coming in their yachts. And outside of Trump bombing fishing boats in the Caribbean, and I don't think they have much to fear because a lot of them are Trump friends too, because Trump don't really care about anything other than the pocket, the dollar, who is rich, who is affluent, who can buy influence. So the reality is that I feel pretty confident on tourism product. But I would like to know how the tourism board was able to quantify that assessment, because Jose Van der Poel, the Minister of Infrastructure, he said that basically Angola is going to see a $31 billion return on investment for Bermuda Air, which is fantastical. If that were to happen, we would be like any one of those oil-rich nations in the world, But the reality is that we don't know because it's a state secret.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hughes. So I will jump over to properly welcome Mr. Peter Wickham to the conversation. Mr. Wickham is a political consultant and principal director of the leading Caribbean political research company, Caribbean Development Research Services. Mr. Wickham has served in his personal capacity as a consultant to organizations such as CDP, UNICEF, the ILO, OAS, and TIDCO. He was previously a lecturer of political science and research methods at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. Mr. Wickham, good night. Thank you for joining us on APM Online. I will open the floor for you for any comments that you may have on tonight's topic.
Yeah. Well, good night. And again, my apologies. I had to wrap up another meeting. I immediately recognized Sardis Webster, who I want to say a special good evening to, because it's one of the recognizable faces in the chat group. This is not a familiar forum to me otherwise, but I'm happy to join you. I got a sense that you were looking at how is Angola and the region faring in this global political environment. I think that's the move that we're discussing tonight. And I was curious to hear the comments from, I believe it was Hayden that was talking just now about the extent to which countries like Angola would flourish in this environment, which is a nice thought. The reality, as he's saying, that when the world is in a disarray, there are some people that look for an oasis in the desert. And Angola is one such oasis where they will come with their family and so on. During COVID, we had some of that in Barbados, where people that had private planes, would come and we introduced this welcome start program, and people came and they hid away for months on end in an apartment that they rented by themselves after they did the whole COVID thing, and they were happy to do that. So in a war, it's possible that that could be a challenge. My concerns for the region, though, go beyond that, and I'm concerned that there has to be a balance between the extent to which you may get more business with this whole question of the cost of doing business. Angola is a low tax destination. Sorry, Angola is a no tax destination, right? Low or no?
No
No.
corporate,
No tax.
no
We are
No
corporate, no
tax.
corporate tax.
No tax.
No
Yeah.
pretense.
No
Yeah,
tax.
we are low tax.
No corporate tax.
Yeah. I see Byron smiling broadly. You see. Yeah. You are in no tax
I think we were
jurisdiction.
low tax, a low tax.
Yeah.
No tax.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but one of the downsides of being a no tax jurisdiction is that you don't have direct taxation, you have indirect taxation, and most of your revenue to pay public servants and provide services comes from consumption taxes, and like sales taxes and things of that nature, taxes on rooms. But basically, a lot of these are inflationary. And as a result, while you may be getting more business, the reality is the cost of everything is going up. And a lot of people who are outside of the tourism belt and outside of the entities where they will earn more money are going to be faced with increased costs of goods because you import your inflation. So your goods hitting the supermarket and hardware stores and whatnot with increased costs, which means that when you add consumption taxes and so on, sales taxes on top of that, it pushes the price up. So the cost of living is going to skyrocket. And I'm hearing projections now $200 a barrel for a barrel of oil. My understanding is that the refinery that has been hit, the natural gas facility that has been hit, it's going to take them 2 years to get back to the production level that they were at before. And I'm very, very concerned because we are not really in a position to cope. And it's as though the elephants are fighting and we're just getting stepped on in the process, which is our reality. So it's not the end of the world. And Angola is in a better position than most because you guys are still a British colony, overseas territory.
Tendency, yeah.
My apologies. Yeah, you're still an overseas territory, and it provides a
No, we are
protection.
still a British colony. Get it correct. We're still a British colony.
Okay.
I was always told that to say a colony was offensive, that you're not allowed to say, it's an overseas
We are still a
territory.
British colony. I will say it as it is.
Yeah, well, I was trying to be kinder. But yes, you
Politically
are.
correct.
Yeah. So yeah, so that affords you some level of protection. You're not going to get negative listed the way that we are on a blacklist and a gray list. That won't happen to Angola because you have the protection of being within the
I
European
challenge you on
Union.
that as well. We do get blacklisted and
You
graylisted
do?
as a British colony.
Yes.
Okay. And you're not protected?
No protections whatsoever.
All right, fair enough. So
So some things are on our own. Yeah.
Yeah.
some things are on
and,
your own, but for
Yeah.
a lot of things,
Barbados is
you
off all lists, all blacklist, gray lists, and they are
yeah.
independent republic. So it says a
For
lot about being a
now.
colony.
For now, yeah. I mean, this is
If
not
if
the
I'm not
place.
mistaken, I believe Angola is currently on one of those blacklists that the
Okay.
BVI has just been able to be removed from. So
From
yeah, we do make our way onto those lists. Because while we are British overseas territories, and I'd like to say we dabble in financial services, our biggest competitors remain the UK and those places, and they would not like to see us in those industries. So we continue to have those challenges.
Yeah,
I
okay,
just
fair enough.
I just want to make a point here on the tourism discussion, how it affects Anguilla, but in Grenada's situation, where you're looking at our tourism, well, first of all, regionally, you have countries that depend 25 to 70% of their GDP in many islands depend on tourism. In Grenada, it's about 35 to 40%. So it's pretty high. And when we have, as Brother Wickham pointed out, when you have these escalating cost of living in our source markets, the US and Europe in particular, it will affect our tourism product here, that it can have a result of reduced travel demand from those key markets, because the resources that our travelers expect is just not going to be there. So we anticipate if this conflict continues, there could be definite implications for our tourism product. That kind of mass tourism, the cruise ship, and also the traditional overstay visitors that we have. You have the high-end sector, so you're in a privileged situation. We are not. And I think most of the other Caribbean countries.
I want to go back to food security in the region, and we mentioned Guyana earlier as being one of the few who can actually feed itself. But I think we're still looking at this from the wrong way. Guyana has a product. They have food, and obviously they can consume it locally. Guyanans should be focusing on, okay, we are throwing away X% of our food on a daily basis. And there are countries like Anguilla, like St. Martin, like Montserrat, and some of the other islands in the region, who would love to have that food that Guyana is throwing away. So if we still thinking that it's up to Guyana has it, bring it away, but we should be the ones going to Guyana and say, hey, can we get that food from you? There has to be a changing of the mindset. Guyana should be saying we shouldn't be throwing away. We had a policy, a food policy, that we wanted to ensure that 25% of our food by 2025 is grown, in the region, and it didn't happen. 2030 is going to come, and that won't happen either, because we're still looking at this thing through the wrong lens. Guyana should be saying, look, let's send a delegation to Anguilla. Let's send one to Jamaica. Let's send one to Antigua, because we know that there are challenges in all these countries across the region. We have a product that you obviously need. It will help you to achieve the goals that we've set for food security. So, and let's push it. So there should be a push and a pull, and not just a pull and no push. And that is, if we don't understand our role within CARICOM, and that we should be joining together and it in a truly united way, and not just everyone still doing their own thing. That's what it feels like to me. Everyone is doing their own thing. We've got to have a push and a pull.
I want to jump in here a little bit, Sheriff, on that, because the problem with Guyana finding oil is that it takes away their focus from everything else. And
but that's the problem. That's the problem.
So they, places like Dubai, for example, they decided to take their oil wealth and diversify the economy. We had hotspots like Croatia and all those places have gone diversifying the economy into tourism and so forth, right? Guyana have the ability to really diversify their economic base. And food security for the rest of the region is one of those. But I think that what Guyana is not going to do that, because Guyanas have a single-minded focus now, not on gold, not on energy, but on fuel and making as much money from oil as possible. So I think that the region, the rest of the region,
that's where we're getting it wrong.
Right, I know, but the rest of the region, the rest of the region need to get to Guyana on a collective basis. They had a recently concluded meeting in Nevis. Now, if I had gone to that meeting in Nevis, or I know if Dr. Webster had gone to that meeting in Nevis, one of the things that would have been brought up with the Guyanese Prime Minister and all of those other leaders there at that meeting is the issue of food security. And this is before the Iran war broke out, but that would have been an issue, because when I was a parliamentary secretary, I had discussions with members of the government of Guyana back in 2011-12 about this whole notion of being able to provide the Caribbean and looking at reefers and throughout the Caribbean and so forth. How can we create these shipment points into the Caribbean to ensure that we can secure our food security while Guyana can benefit from it as well, and the farmers can benefit from it as well. So I think that needs to be high on the OECS and the CARICOM agenda, on the Caribbean agenda, to have that reaching out to the Minister of Agriculture and to the Guyanese government as to how we can achieve this goal. But I don't think Guyana is going to do it, because right now, if you follow what is going on in Guyana, there's a single focus on oil wealth.
And that is where I think we're getting it wrong. The largest industry worldwide is agriculture, because every single person, no matter who you are, whether you're black, white, pink, or blue, you have to eat. And the food, so you have to produce food. Agriculture is the largest industry worldwide. And if we don't recognize that, there's a huge potential in food. That's why the American governments and governments across the world invest significantly in their farmers, in their food. They subsidize the production of food. Milk.
Well,
American
Trump is killing the farming
government
sector.
subsidize milk. They subsidize beef. They subsidize these things because they realize it's important to feed your people. And the reason
But
why we're having these
Trump is
challenges in the
destroying the
world now.
farming sector in America. But do you know that
Yes,
Bill
but
Gates?
Trump is a special case, and we all
Yeah,
know he's a special case. He
Bill Gates is
doesn't
the
understand these
largest
issues,
owner.
right?
Bill Gates is the largest owner of farmland in the United States of America. But Bill Gates is not interested in farming. Bill Gates is interested in creating lab-grown foods that can be given to people and can use Congress and the American government through the FDA to sanction these lab-grown foods as compared to organically grown foods. So this is why it's even more important that we in the Caribbean start to ensure food security. And I think that Guyana offers a great opportunity for us to do so.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. I just want to jump in quickly on this issue of food security. I do a call-in program in Barbados, and it's a popular issue that comes up all the time. And there's an expectation that Guyana, and to a less extent Dominica, where I am now, are some of the countries that can feed the region, because there's a surplus of food being produced in those places. The problem is really logistics. And I mean, it's easy to say, yeah, Guyana produces a surplus. Why aren't they feeding the rest of us? But the reality is that you can't put food on a plane in most instances, and there's no communication, there's no boat, or there's no ferry that moves up and down the island. And while you have needs in Anguilla probably finds it easier to get stuff that they need from Miami than they get it from Guyana. It probably is easier, or Puerto Rico. It may very well be easier to move stuff from the north than to move it from the south. So I think in theory, what is being said makes a whole lot of sense, but in practice, the logistics is the key failure that we have in the region, because we are very, very poorly connected. And in situations where we're connected by air, the reality is that it cannot work for food, because it is far too heavy a commodity to be able to ship by air. And therein lies the problem. So unless we can work out some kind of a boat or ferry system that can move between the islands with greater ease than we currently have, we're going to be back to
Absolutely,
square
Mr.
one.
Kadris.
Yeah,
I think that is the issue.
Mm.
Oranges are grown in Florida for the most part, and they're shipped to all parts of the U.S. and out of the U.S. If we keep on thinking in this myopic view that it's difficult to get stuff from Dominica to Anguilla, it's difficult to get. We're still thinking individual. We're not thinking how can we collectively, as a CARICOM region, come together and say how can we move goods from our individual territories across the region. And
how do
let's
we?
let's fund it as a region. Let's fund it. And it can be air. Obviously, we know the challenges with air in the region. It has to be via sea. And what is preventing us as a region to say, let us invest in a fit for purpose vessel that can move goods across the region, and not just food, because there are lots of products that are grown and that are made in many of the other CARICOM countries that other CARICOM countries can benefit from. We've got to stop thinking that it's going to be hard. We've got to start thinking that, okay, it's hard, yes, but if we never make that first step, we're never going to ever get to the point where we actually become solution oriented. We can't be thinking, oh, there's 3 million people in Jamaica, and that's it. We've got to think Jamaica, we've got Trinidad, we've got Guyana, we've got all these countries, millions of people across the region. And can't we, as a CARICOM region, can't we move goods from Guyana, from Dominica, from Jamaica, move it across the region? Don't we have enough capacity within the region, enough people within the region to ensure that a vessel can move across the region and move these goods? But if we're thinking, oh, if you're just thinking Anguilla, and how are we going to fund that? Will Anguilla pay for it? It's going to be too expensive for Anguilla to do it alone. But if we start thinking regional, as a region, every country in the region could benefit from this. So everyone must play a part. Everyone must do its part, ensure that we can move food across the region. And it is in our interest, in our best interest to do so. We're still thinking individual. We still not flip the switch and start thinking region, CARICOM, joining together, joining our resources together to ensure that we can move this stuff and make it happen. We're still thinking, because many of the countries around the region, we're still thinking, oh, we don't want free movement for people. So there's still this individualistic approach to the whole CARICOM, the whole regional thing. And until we get out of that completely, we're never going to overcome the individual border issues that we currently face. And I think those are the real challenges that we have. We're still thinking individual,
Yeah,
because some
I
people
see,
got one of the foot in and one of the
one
foot,
second,
one
one
foot out.
second, Mr. I see Mr. Campbell
Yes, yes. I
has been itching to
I
jump
wanted
in
to
here.
make a point here. I
Yeah.
agree with the regional approach and the role that Guyana could play, but I also believe strongly that national policies matter. And I want to give the example here in Grenada, for example. So, for example, we don't have a land use policy, and we've just concluded an agricultural census. And you know what we found out? In the 10 years that expired, we have lost 33% of our farms. They're no longer in production. We have lost 20% of our agricultural lands. We have seen the aging of the local farmer moving from between 50 and 69 years old. We have seen the majority of farmers are now part-time, and it goes on. So I'm saying national policies are important and they're critical. We are not investing in the agro-processing. We are not investing in young persons. In other words, we have to try to do this locally first, where it has a possibility of working. Agriculture plays a very important part in our rural development and employment and in food security principle. We see policies where, for example, and I'm talking about my personal experience because I'm a farmer, I produce food. And recently, and it's good to go on the ground and see what's happening, a new supermarket opened, Rams. It's called Rams. And I went there with various products of citrus, different varieties. They weren't purchased because the government granted them license to import from the United States. So these kind of policies don't help our food security. It's not providing the motivation and the encouragement for. So we have an aging farmer. We're not seeing sufficiently young persons coming into the sector. We know that our livestock industry is on the decline. So where's the investment? It's not. So I'm agreeing, yes, that the regional approach is important, and CARICOM initiative to reduce the food import bill by 25%. But we have to look at the national policies if it's going to work on a regional basis. I just want to give this input. So
I know, I agree with you
But
100%.
Byron,
Yeah,
it comes
I
down
agree.
to the fact is that governments they talk the talk based on the data that they have, but they don't walk the walk.
yeah,
If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They talk
True.
the talk, but they don't walk the walk. Because in order to do so, you have to be willing to invest in
that's
food
right.
security. And now we had a minister by the name of Quincy Gomes Marie, who, and Dr. Webster, as a minister of finance, can tell you that she was knocking on his door, pushing on his door, bulldozing on his door for increased capital in order to invest in food security. There are a number of things that she did. She provided the farmers in Angola who are signed up to the Farmers Association free water tanks and fill them up to 2,000 gallons of water to get them started. Canopies, free canopies. So they didn't have to pay for it. Canopies. And then even with a canopy village where persons can now farm year round and so forth, because you reduce the temperature and so forth that hit plants such as tomatoes and so forth. So a significant investment. Also in terms of fishing, she had an agreement with one of the major fuel suppliers to provide subsidized fuel for fishers and so forth. So the investment was happening. We invested significantly in the people's market in Anguilla. It was a derelict state of it was in a state of derelict, and we paved the yard. We upgraded the facility. We had new batch restrooms placed, put in luxury restrooms, as a matter of fact, because we had one of our five-star hotels, Maljohana, who did it for us as well. So, and then we partnered with the Anguillan St. Lucia Association to retrofit the roof and so forth. So the investments were happening in terms of food security. But even with all of the investments that we did, and we started an abattoir and a hatchery, and we invested in bringing in, importing layers and broilers and so forth. All of these things were done, and increasing the genetic pool by bringing in goats and sheep and so forth to improve the genetic pool in Anguilla. But it goes back to your point. There's a decline in farming in Anguilla, and and across the region, across the world, even in the United States of America. But how are we going to eat? And this is where persons like Bill Gates, with all of their money and influence, are now start to invest significantly in artificially created foods that are bad for our health. And you have Monsanto's, right? You have Monsanto's and Bayer and all of these, and Roundup and all of these companies that are one conglomerate that are making us sick, ensuring that we are sick so that we can buy their medications and so forth. So we have to understand all of this and have a rethinking, and not only talk about 25% by 2025. We have to make the investments to ensure that food import bill is reduced. And it's going back to your point. There are certain businesses in Anguilla that carry local products. You can go to JW Proctor's, you can go to Best Buy, and you see locally grown produce on the shelves. But it's not enough. And then you have a young farmer. His name is Shane Smith, Quality Farms, young. And it's so refreshing to see young persons like him get involved in farming from a major standpoint, but still not getting the support that is desired. So there's a lot of things that need to be done to encourage persons. I mean, I do my own farming. My hope is that by the end of this year, I won't be going to the grocery store anymore.
Yes.
But that's on an individual basis, right?
Yeah.
So more people, and I try to encourage it. I put up pictures, I put up videos, and say, hey, if I can do it, anybody can do it, right?
Yeah.
And I had awful soil, and I used sargassum, right? To enhance the soil, and it produces like you would not believe. So the reality is that we have to do more. We have to do more educating. We have to do more investing, and we have to do more protection. Because when you spoke about rams, government should be saying, hey, as long as we have farmers that can produce this product, this amount, you can be able to top up from outside, but you must exhaust what we have in Grenada, St. Lucia, Barbados first. I remember many years ago going to Jamaica.
I think Mr. Campbell made a very good point when he spoke about policies. And this is where governments now, the government you elect becomes critical. Because in Anguilla, for example, we have a government that has decided that they would invest to build a house in the UK, a UK house. They put in significant priority and moving with great speed to invest between 20 and 15, 16 to $20 million to invest in a UK house. And as I see it, to ensure that they can win the next election. This has nothing to do with what is good for the average Anguillan who live on the ground. Any government's main responsibility is to ensure that it's doing the greatest good for the greatest number. But here we have a government who has taken a policy, a decision to invest in an overseas house. And we have many critical needs. Investing in a house in the UK is not a need. That is a want. We have many critical needs in Anguilla, like agriculture, which is severely underfunded, and that money is being spent, on a house in the UK, which will not benefit the average Anguillan, and that is their priority. So that's why we have to ensure that when we go to the polls, that we just don't vote for a party. We have to say to ourselves, what are the values? What are the things that I really and truly care about in my community? And who is speaking to me? Who is speaking that language that I can say, yes, this party's platform align with my values. So it's important that we don't just go to the polls and vote for a color. We have to do more than just looking at a color. We have to start looking at a party, their values, their policies that they're pushing forward, and what is good for for the country. This government is investing this money in the UK. If we were to say to them, take that $16 million and invest it in agriculture, they would come up with all kinds of excuses why it can't be done. But now they are pushing full speed ahead to invest in a house in the UK in this geopolitical climate. They're still talking these things, and again, going back to policy again, as some of you may know, well, I'm sure all of you probably know this by now. We had elections in Anguilla last year. A new government came to office, and they came in office pretty early in the term. Budget was already set, funding was already allocated for a number of projects, and the government decided to pause the majority of the projects, failing to realize that by doing so, you are putting people out of work. Because they wanted to make a political statement, they decided to pause projects. Now, a country is not like a car you can just stop and then restart and you're back down the motorway, in 0 to 60. A country takes time to move. The policies that you implement takes time to take root and to hold. So you've got to make sure that while you are creating your own policies to move you forward, that whatever is happening on the ground continues. Because when you stop a project, what in effect you're doing is you're stopping people from working. You're putting people out of jobs. People who were depending on these projects can now no longer work. But they didn't seem to understand those implications. And so now we have a situation where a lot of people are saying things that are difficult on the ground. And it's difficult because projects that should have already started have not yet started. And people who were looking forward, and one of the things you want to do as a government, you want to ensure that you create stable long-term employment. And that's essential. And so it's important that we understand that policies really do determine how you move forward. It shows where your values are, what are the things you're focused on, and if we are truly interested in investing in agriculture, we would then push towards those areas where we know these are things that may not be the sexy projects, but these are things that are important. These are things that will help our people for the long term, because we need to feed ourselves. COVID exposed every country in the world. It exposed the United Kingdom, it exposed the US, it exposed the region. And yet here we are still having this discussion tonight about agriculture, and we're not making the necessary investments in it, knowing what happened across the region. So policy is extremely important. And, we as a people, we've got to start thinking about how do we elect our governments. And it shouldn't be just about what color or what your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather did for generations, but what are the values that you as an individual are looking for from your government and the party that you elect? And I think that's one of the challenges that we face in the region, that we don't vote based on issues. We vote based on somebody's likability, or historically we've always done it that way, and it hasn't gotten us anywhere.
I agree, Mr. Hanley. When we started, we spoke about the responsibility that comes with voting and the consequences of elections. I know I saw Mr. Wickham trying to jump in a while ago. So, Mr. Wickham?
Is this a quick point? When reference is made to RAM selling food, and I'm minded to ask, what are the cost advantages? Because my experience has been that when government issues a license to someone like Rams to import, invariably it's because they can import the same product that you're growing far cheaper. And essentially you do the consumer a favor by giving them access to a cheaper product. The issue in Barbados is chicken wings. You can issue a license for the importation of chicken wings, which people actually prefer. local chicken producers are complaining because they can't compete on those price points, and they're saying that this person can do it so much more cheaply. Why you're not giving the local farmer an opportunity to be able to grow and sell chickens? My question is
Do you know that those chickens are subsidized by the U.S. governments and governments around the world? Why they can be sold at that price? They're
That
Yeah,
is
but
correct.
subsidized.
That is correct.
Yeah.
but Patrick, that's not a problem. I mean, it's a problem, but I'm saying that's not. I understand that, but I'm saying when I'm looking at a consumer that is living on a fixed budget and is saying, I want to have a product at a cost that I can afford. Why are you forcing me to do business with a farmer, a local farmer, as opposed to saying, well, let's say me to take a product off the shelf. It's cheaper. Of course, it's subsidized, but the point is that it is what it is, and it is cheaper.
But why
Which
aren't we
which means
subsidizing it? Why
which
aren't we
means
subsidizing
I'll
it
go to a point
ourselves?
though. I'll go to a point though.
right.
If you look at how we spend money, we can subsidize the farmer just the same way so that they can bring their
Exactly. Why
prices
aren't we
down.
doing it? Yeah, we need to do the
Yeah,
same.
but
But
We
it's
can't
interesting.
come with a
But it's interesting in the
subsidized
case that
chicken.
I brought up.
no,
It's
but
interesting in the case that I brought up that the product imported by Rams was actually not cheaper. It was more expensive, actually.
okay. Well, then that's a
So
different
that's a different
scenario.
scenario
Look,
altogether. That was a different scenario.
some time ago, I had a conversation with the agriculture minister in Grenada. Right, I'm not going to say how long ago because then you know who it was.
Yeah. Okay.
And his challenge is that he was trying to promote the local chocolate industry.
Yeah.
I was trying to get advantages for them to be able to develop this chocolate industry. He's competing with tourism, and he's saying that invariably government was willing to give the tourism industry a lot more money than they would give the agriculture industry. Because you were talking about why can't you subsidize agriculture? And this is the reason. The reason is simple. When you put $1 million in tourism, invariably the returns are significant. And the returns are significant. They're spread across the economy. A lot of foreign exchange comes in, and people immediately see a direct relationship between what is put out and what comes back to them. In the case of agriculture, invariably you're saying you're throwing millions and millions of dollars into a project, and the returns are not immediate. And indeed, sometimes the returns are slow. So maybe you're looking at a 10-year margin or a 5-year margin in terms of developing the chocolate industry, the marketing and export. And you have an instant reaction. Countries like Bermuda is also, well, you call it a colony. I wouldn't call it a colony, but Bermuda is in a similar situation to Angola. And they have gone into the food production business a long time ago. And it is not a food insecure country. Indeed, it is the third most prosperous country in the world. There's no concept of food insecurity in Bermuda. During COVID, they did not have food insecurity because they had the money to charter planes to bring food if necessary, which is something that a lot of us cannot do or could not do. So to me, this idea that what they have determined is that their land is a valuable resource and they're going to use it in the area that gives them the greatest return, which is ultimately what the agriculture minister in Grenada was telling me that Grenada was also doing, in that they were throwing resources into something which gave them the kinds of returns that generated foreign exchange, so they could go and buy food like everybody else.
Peter,
Now,
there's another.
It's
There's
not a
another.
popular view,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's something that we have to struggle with, because
True.
when you say give an incentive to agriculture, you also have to understand if you give agriculture an incentive, I mean, Silas would tell you, if you give agriculture an incentive, it has to come from somewhere. So either it comes from your roads, it comes from your tourism marketing, it comes from paying public services, coming from somewhere. And the
It
question
comes up
is,
the house you
comes
got to build
from
buy in London.
No, but you have to
I-
understand the multiplier effect as well. There's a multiplier effect of when you spend the money in your economy, because one person's income is another person's spending, right? So you can't ignore the multiplier effect of spending money within your local economy. And I think that's missing from the entire argument as well. And just as we invest in other areas, as Mr. Hughes said, you invest in a house in London, but you can't see the connection of how valuable that same money would be if you were to invest it in the local agriculture sector. So if we can't connect those dots, then we're really going to struggle, as a region, because I sense that we're having the similar discussions around the region, having similar challenges, and we have a situation where Bermuda thinks it's better for them to charter a plane, send the money outside of Bermuda, rather than investing it within the local economy, have that money circulating within the local economy.
See,
And so I think we will need a shift in our entire thinking if we were to get over this hurdle. I am sensing that.
I just want to make a final point on it, and I
Yeah,
listen to Peter well, and that makes sense. But here's the situation too: is that we are our non-communicable diseases are rising rapidly. We are
yeah,
consuming a lot of imported bad foods. They're really
Yes,
very unhealthy,
yes.
and that's what's coming in. That's what's supplementing our local
very
food.
good point. That's a very good
And
point.
Yes.
therefore, we have to invest there. We have to invest in our farm access roads. We have to invest in training, in the agro processing. We have to. I agree with the point that the tourism and the other sectors are important, but food security is national security. So if you don't focus on it, it's a dangerous situation that we're in right now.
Very
And
dangerous
Agreed,
situation.
agreed,
Very
agreed,
dangerous situation, Mr.
agreed,
Campbell, because
agreed.
the
That's a very
STDs
good
that we
point.
are
Yeah,
suffering in the Caribbean has a lot to do with the poor quality foods that we are importing from these first world nations. So you're
100%,
absolutely
100%.
correct.
Yeah. Mhm.
And
100%. And that's something and that's a
on that
cost
note,
that we don't, it's a cost that we actually don't see up front. We don't quantify how much are we spending in health as a result of these bad foods that we are importing from God knows where. So we really have to take a step back, reevaluate the entire process and say, can we cut our health bill by X if we were to do more for ourselves and we were to invest in more healthier choices? Food, tomatoes that will last, for 2 weeks, as opposed to you put them down on the counter for 2 days and they go soft. So there's a larger discussion that needs to be had,
Yeah.
and we're still we don't seem to be there yet, and that's the challenge I see we're having.
yes. All right. So just to bring us back to, and I can almost anticipate what the answers are going to be to my next question. But to bring us back to the topic at hand, and just really quickly, because there are a couple more things that we want to get through in a short amount of time. But really quickly, and I'll just start with the whole persons up here on my screen. So with Mr. Hughes, what do you think is the single most impactful measure the Caribbean islands and Caribbean governments can implement in this current moment to alleviate the rising cost of living to its citizens?
There are a few things that can be done in the Caribbean, but I'm going to speak to Angola specifically, right? We have to revisit our thinking as it relates to buying that house in England. We have to go full-fledged into renewable energy, renewable and reusable energy sources, and we have to ensure our food security. These are some of the things that we have to invest in immediately, and we have the capacity to do it. We have the financial wherewithal to do it, and we need to do it now.
I mean, the answer is, what can small islands do? What are some of the immediate solutions? I want to agree with my colleague here, but again, I'm just going to make it as brief as possible. Firstly, local agriculture, invest in agro processing and climate smart farming. I think also, as you mentioned, the renewable energy, the transition, solar, wind, reduce oil dependency. Some islands are targeting 50%, and others that would stabilize our electricity rate and reduce that external vulnerability. I think certainly the regional integration question, CARICOM, I think maybe joint procurement in particular, and collective in fuel, in fertilizer, and in food, bigger bargaining power. I think also is the digital and remote economy. We have to reduce reliance on physical imports, expand our digital services, remote work economy. I think this is, but most important is strengthen local production system in terms of storage and logistics and cold chains, reduce post-harvest losses. these are somewhat, and also the financial innovation aspect of it. I think the debt for climate swaps and some of these things are important, and the strategic non-alignment. I mean, we need to maintain balanced diplomacy, engage all blocs without overdependence. So small states must be agile, not aligned, strategic, and not sentimental. This is my comments on this. But we can, of course, expand on this, but time constraints.
Dr. Webster?
Yes, certainly. Thank you for that. We talk about the on-land, agriculture, and we also can look into things like aqua farming, fishing. We have to expand that. Anguilla has 200 miles of water that is to the north of us that belongs to us, is a exclusive economic zone, exclusive fishing zone, and we need to exploit that more. And I think that we all are saying that it is the responsibility of government to facilitate getting these industries off the ground. Not that government has to do the funding, because, as Brother Campbell said, there are limited resources. However, and we need to be able to, as governments, to facilitate, our fisher folk getting loans or getting grants, or getting access to the funding necessary to increase the size of their craft, and to train them in fishing techniques that they can use, because by them bringing that catch into Anguilla, that would increase Anguilla's food source. But this can be done throughout the region, and there can be exchange between the different countries in the region in terms of agriculture, in terms of our fishing, what is available and what's allowed. Anguilla has, again, 200 miles. Maybe we can then sell licenses for a certain part of that fishing zone that is not easily accessible to our Anguillan fishers, so that we can broaden that ability for the region to support itself, and then we become less reliant on imports outside of the region. But again, electricity, fuel cost, that is something that we realize can cripple any economy. As the cost of fuel goes up, so does the cost of living, as Mr. Wickham said. And these are things that we have to, be very cognizant of, and we have to make bold steps. If we had transitioned to renewable energy, in a timely fashion, we would be less worried right now about where we are, as the missiles strike and as decisions are made, some foolhardy and others without thinking. And so those are the areas, I think. But our government have to look out for the well-being of our people. And so making those steps, of course, necessary in terms of, the increasing agriculture and increasing fishing, making food security an immediate priority, and not pausing and reassessing and then making bad decisions. We have to make sure that our people can survive through this. And because right down the road from now, the hurricane season starts again in 2 months. And if we think that we are resilient and that what we had put away for a rainy day is going to survive this immediate onslaught of what's happening in the global economy, I mean, we got another thing coming. It's we
Scary.
really, these shocks are scary for any administration, and you have to
Yeah.
make sure that we prepare for these. And so I think that all the leaders and the government throughout the Caribbean have to be cognizant of where we sit in terms of the geography and what can affect us, and that if there's another pandemic, or if there is another major hurricane, that everything that we thought we were doing well will go out the window.
All right, really quickly over to Mr. Wickham.
No, my comments are going to be quick but controversial. And I certainly support all of the initiatives that have been taken, all of the suggestions in terms of local agriculture and dealing with, alternative energy. That's a big thing in Barbados. We have a very developing alternative energy grid, but of course, it has to feed into the existing grid, and that is problematic. Another part of it, though, is in terms of reducing the cost of living, is accepting that you're not going to be able to reduce the cost of living, and the alternative is to try and find ways and means of people coping better. So letting people earn more money. I visited Anguilla once, and I found accessing Anguilla is challenging. And my understanding is that it gets more challenging depending on the time of the year that one attempts to go. I was actually supposed to be in Montserrat today, and I opted not to go to Montserrat because it was too difficult to get out of Montserrat. So you have airlift issues. And I asked myself, are some of our countries not leaving money on the table simply because people can't get in and get out easily? And maybe we are ignoring a potential growth area. So we talked a lot about agriculture, but in the final analysis, there is a greater interest in many instances in visiting our countries for tourism purposes, or in the case of Anguilla for investment or for business, offshore business or whatnot. And my question is, when we're talking about reducing the cost of living, shouldn't we also think about ways and means we can reduce things that are inhibiting us from earning more money and making our way in this world? And I think that is that has to be part of this conversation. We need as small islands to be able to earn more money and to do what we do it well, and to be able to earn more money from it. And again, I go back to the Bermuda model. Bermuda, they do not waste their time with agriculture, largely because they understand that they don't have a lot of land to speak of. Water is expensive, and they prefer to use their resources in a way that they maximize comparative advantage. I mean, we study it in school. Comparative advantage means that if I have an acre of land that I can use for planting dasheen, or alternatively for planting a golf course, and that acreage generates more money as a golf course, you use it as a golf course. And I appreciate that that's offensive to people who are into agriculture, because you can't eat a golf course, but in the final analysis, you generate foreign exchange that you can use to buy stuff that you can eat with NCDs and all. So there has to be a mix, and I am not for any reason rejecting what has been said, and I think that all of the ideas are important. But I think that one of the things we have to look at is what are we missing? What can we maximize in terms of generating income for our economies in new and different ways, and maximizing the comparative advantage that we have.
I think one of the advantages that Anguilla has is something that I'm surprised has not been addressed tonight, and that is .ai, and whether or not we are utilizing that to its fullest capacity, especially where.
I want to say something about .ai, and I think one of the reasons why we haven't spoken about .ai is .ai goes directly into the coffers of the government of Anguilla, and that is where we're talking about investments. That's why I said earlier that government of Anguilla has a financial wherewithal to make these investments that Patrick and I and Dr. Webster and other persons on the panel have spoken about. We're in a unique position. We're in a position like Guyana. Guyana have the financial wherewithal because of their oil boom to invest in other niche industries and to protect themselves. We too have that funding, but this government have said no handouts. So in the case of Dr. Webster's government, when they were providing electricity credits and food vouchers and all of these things and expanding the senior and junior shield, this government have said no handouts to the people of Anguilla. So they're hoarding this .ai money, but it needs to be invested in physical and social infrastructure in Anguilla, and to invest in our food security. So there's enough money to do these things, but they have to have the desire to ensure that the people of Anguilla comes first.
I completely agree, Mr. Hughes, because I think when I asked the question earlier of Dr. Webster in terms of what some of the plans were, the Sovereign Wealth Fund surrounding dot AI to ensure that our
Yes.
people are educated, to ensure that we have the infrastructure, and as if that money was invested wisely, that we would have the financial wherewithal to better weather and navigate some of these external crises. And what we've seen here is that the government, instead of doing that, this current administration, instead of doing that by the removal of GST and the implementation of the two other taxes, what they have done is reduced the amount of money coming into government, and have been using the .ai money to boost
Stick up in there, Quincy. The change in the tax regime by removing the GST, they have effectively increased the cost of living. They have increased the cost of living because they removed and repealed the GST that was reclaimable by the vendors, by the shopkeepers, by the businesses, and have implemented a general services tax of 13% that is not reclaimable. So the people of Angola, that now becomes a business cost that the people of Angola have to pay. And don't forget an 9% goods tax. I think Patrick and Merrick and Dr. Webster can speak a lot to this.
No, I agree with you. You know, when they spoke about bringing relief by removing GST, the only thing that they did was relieve government's coffers, because it certainly didn't bring relief to the people of Angola. It brought relief to government's coffers. It has put us in a position where we are now reliant on .ai for our operational cost. And had we not done so, we could have been in a position where .ai and Anguilla could have been in a position that a number of other islands wish that they would have been in, where we can provide direct funding to the people of Anguilla through this resource. And unfortunately, because of whether it is lack of understanding, lack of political will, this is an political ignorance. This is where we find ourselves. And I think if you'd permit me, Mr. Hughes and Mr. Hanley, I would like to take us back, because I think it's important to know your history. If I take us back to the period of 2007 to 2010, and we have to do this quickly because I am seeing my producer remind me that we are running close to time. But
before you jump back there, I've been taking notes and listening to these points and all that. I'll just be quick though, because the conversation gave a lot of food for thought from many angles. But when you touch on the .ai, in my opening remarks, I alluded to government have to reach back and help out. We're in a position where we have, for us, even though it's still just a drop in a bucket, we were able to create, with our last government under Dr. Webster, we were able to create record amount in reserves. And the plan was using the .ai money, like you mentioned earlier, to go into the National Wealth Fund, because those of us who live here, who've gone through Hurricane Louis, Hurricane Lenny, the likes, the COVID-19 pandemic, knows there was never ever anything for Anguilla to fall back on. So the administration under Dr. Webster knew that we had to build that buffer, because it wasn't and I saw a stat where I think in the last 8 years, the Caribbean has been struck by 5 category 5 hurricanes or something to that effect. So it's not going to be a if, it's going to be when we're going to have to face the next shock. I think it's Dr. Webster who spoke also about we're about to go into the hurricane season. So here we are facing the shocks of what's happening with the war in the Middle East, an impending hurricane season, and we can't, if you're living in the Caribbean, you definitely can't put your head in the sand when it comes to the hurricane season. So I know every country in the Caribbean is not in a position
unless you're Trump, who don't think that Cuba get hurricanes.
and most every You know, we know we get them, but every country in the Caribbean is not in a position, yes, to reach back and help their citizens. But those countries that are in that position have to start putting plans from now. You can't wait till the proverbial stuff hit the fan, but you have to start doing it now. And well, you should have already started, if I be totally honest. I think Sherry spoke up also about putting things on pause for a country. I mean, I am sure the fine gentlemen who are Mr. Campbell and Mr. Wickham who are on here with us, they'll be shocked to hear that a country would pause major national developments for over a year. You know, where you have no step, you put a pause on a building, a fit and proper building for government, just to have your staff now striking because of the mold issues. That shows that there's no forward planning, no forward thinking. And all you did and you're laying claim to is that you pass these things to test the heat of the country. But Angola's we are in a unique place because we do have the .ai money coming in. So it's incumbent that the government that's in place put something, because these shocks will affect us. It will affect us. And even though Hayden spoke earlier about we want to be in a good place in terms of tourism, God forbid that the attacks start coming down on these sides, because there's that possibility with the sleeper cells and everything. Then if that shuts down and there's no flights at all going, we saw what happened a few weeks ago when Mr. Trump invaded Venezuela. We had a day or two where there were no flights going in and out. Imagine that extended for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So we have to be aware of everything that's going on geopolitically, and the fact that this administration was given a good position. They need to take advantage of it. I just wanted to get that in because I know how the producer is. He as well. Thank you.
Good.
Just,
Actually,
I
you've
just
laid a
want to,
really
I
good
just want to
foundation. One second for
start.
me, Mr. Henley,
Uh-huh.
because I'm actually going to be coming to you. Mr. Richardson laid a very good foundation for where I want us to take the conversation. And that is to look at the period 2007 to 2010, when you had the global economic crisis. And we know what and where Anguilla was when the rest of the world was tightening their belts in 2007, 2008. Anguilla was spending and spending wildly. And then by 2010, we were broke. What lessons do you think were learned, if any? Because ironically enough, the same administration is now in power that was in power during that time. And Mr. Hanley and Mr. Hughes, you both would have been advisors to and around the administration of 2010 to 2015 that came in and had to ultimately clean up the messes from those decisions during that period.
Well,
Mr. Campbell,
yeah.
sorry, Mr. Hanley. Mr. Campbell, were you trying to jump in? I I saw you speaking. Okay. Mr. Hanley.
Yes, I just wanted to go back first to the original question you posed about what can small island developing states do to alleviate some of the challenges that we see, not just on the horizon anymore, but pretty much on our doorsteps now. I think one of the first things I would say we need to do as a region is to change our mindset. We still are thinking in silos. We still are thinking Antigua first, Dominica first, Jamaica first, Guyana first, and that isn't helping us. It won't help us. We've got to recognize that there's strength in our numbers, and we need to unite when it comes to these very important matters. And I think that whole fractured approach to CARICOM was pretty much laid bare in recent months with the whole challenges with America's picking off, these individual states, Guyana, not Guyana, Jamaica, Dominica, St. Lucia, threatening different,
Yeah.
threatening threatening passport issues, threatening visas, threatening all kinds of different things to divide us. And we just fall for the okie doke each time. So we've got to come together as a unit and move as one, move together, so our strength can be felt in our numbers. And of course, food security is extremely important as well. It is important that we recognize that as a nation, and I think COVID taught us that lesson, that we need to focus more attention on food security. And as the regions, most countries around the region spend about 40% of their GDP on food and fuel. So obviously we've got to some work to do that. We've got to reduce that. We've got to focus more on renewable energies so we don't spend so much on fuel, and we've got to do a lot more to reduce our food, import bill. And those things are critical to me for small developing states if we really want to weather these storms. And these storms will come. These cycles happen from, they're either man-made, as we see today, or they're natural, as in, hurricanes, earthquakes and volcanoes, and in the case of Montserrat and the like, these things will happen. And this is where we need governments, coming together and understanding that there's strength, in those numbers. And policy, of course, is important because we need to ensure that currently we are experiencing some windfall revenue in terms of our .ai revenues. But if we don't have responsible fiscal responsibility within our governments, then those windfall situations we could actually lose out because they could take that money and spend it willy-nilly, like buying houses in the UK, when we have our main arterial roadways that need serious work. If you look at our main road network in Anguilla now, it's aging, and there's significant investment required to build
Aging or
our.
age?
Well, definitely,
Well,
however you want to put it. But it
our
needs.
cars and our mechanic bills can tell you how aged they are.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's significant investment that is required in Anguilla, but we see this administration going full steam ahead, spending money elsewhere, and so we've got misplaced priorities. Our values and our priorities don't seem to be in sync, and I think that's important as well. Going back to 2007, 2010 in Anguilla. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago where I said I was getting those vibes again, where we see, what I term as reckless spending and a disregard for fiscal responsibility. And that led us in Anguilla, where we pretty much fell flat on our face. We had to roll back a number of things that we did because we were looking just with the next 3 months. We're looking at the next election as opposed to looking further out and taking decisions that will safeguard Anguilla's future for the long term. We are looking at the next election. And until we elect governments who look beyond the next election and do what is right for the people and ensure by making the necessary investments in infrastructure, necessary investments in agriculture, like we do for tourism and these other areas. Yes, tourism is our main industry, but we suffer from low diversification in these territories. We are not diversified enough. So when there's a shock in our source markets, we get knocked flat on our backs because there's no diversity within our economies. So we've got to focus more on capacity building. We got to build capacity in our islands to make sure that our people start being the entrepreneurs and creating the new jobs and the new small businesses that are the real engines of economic growth in any country really. Small businesses, they make up 60 to 70% of the growth in any country. So we've got to start thinking, how do we incentivize and how do we encourage capacity building and in our economies, and that's something that's been missing. But we are going back to 2007, 2010 again, where we are repeating the mistakes of the past, spending money irresponsibly, not investing in the foundation. And the foundation is always the most important area in anything you do. If you don't invest in the foundation, then whatever you put on top of that will crumble because the foundation isn't solid. And our foundation in the small islands is food security. That's we need to invest in that to make sure that is fundamental. Obviously, we see how fickle the world oil markets are. One man can determine what happens in the rest of the world as it relates to energy. So we've got to become more energy independent. So this is where we need to focus more on renewable sources of energy. So we obviously need to focus on that going forward. And the food security, I said that, renewable energy. And we've got to start thinking about where do we see Anguilla in the next, not just 6 months or next 5 years, but in the next 10, 15 years. So we've got to start long-term planning. And a critical element of that is investing in our people. We've got to build capacity. We've got to look at training as one of the fundamental pillars as well, and how we diversify. Because when we give people the tools by focusing on training, I think that becomes an important part as well. So the similarities I'm seeing from 2007, 2010, and what I'm seeing today is I'm seeing reckless spending creeping back in, and we know where that led us in 2007, 2010, when in 2010 after the elections, where we came in where we had massive deficits that had to be overcome, and similarly what happened in 2020 again. We need to guard against fiscal irresponsibility, and that's one of the challenges that I see. One of the things I would say to Ann Williams is that we need to become more vocal, on these matters. We can't just sit back in our corners and just mumble and grumble. We've really got to be more vocal when we elect a government to do a certain set of tasks. Their role is to ensure there's growth, stability, and security within the country, and anything that falls outside of that, anything that is perceived as just rabid electioneering, vote getting, we have to put that aside. And that is important if we truly want to see growth, and continuity is important as well. As we said in the last election, the government came in the second month, budget set, everything already set, and for the sake of politics, partisan politics, they decided to pause, and our people just didn't really say much. They just kept quiet. So we've got to hold our governments accountable, and that's extremely important as well. We need a strong press. The press is the fourth arm of government, and we need a strong press to ensure that they are actually representing us as a people. But we ourselves, we need to ensure that these things are happening. We need to hold the people that we elect accountable. That's one of the weaknesses I see in Anguilla. Maybe it exists in other areas, in other countries in the region as well. But accountability is lacking, seriously lacking. Certainly for my part in Anguilla, we need to hold people accountable, hold ministers accountable for what they say. What they say they will do. You decide to select a particular party based on a platform. So you voted for a platform based on certain initiatives, certain policies. But then when you get elected, those policies and that platform goes out the door, and then it's business as usual. So we have got to demand more from our leaders as well, because I think we allow our leaders to get away with too much. So part of that
Mr. Henley, it's a delicate balance, because as you can appreciate, in a small state like Anguilla, and when you have certain players that are not afraid to utilize tactics of victimization, it is difficult. for persons to speak out, and so there's a balance that must be found. I am being nudged, sorry, by again the producer. So Mr.
And it's
Hughes,
time constraints. Yeah, yeah.
yes, Mr. Hughes, your take, and I want to jump into something a little bit geopolitics, but a little bit closer to home.
Well, I will read on the geopolitical aspect of it because I'm paying attention to what's happening in the world, and I'm seeing how it's going to impact us significantly. April 12th is our D-Day. April 12th is our D-Day, literally our D-Day. And this is something that we have to pay attention to. We have made suggestions to the government of Angola. Hopefully they take those suggestions on board, and we can see a reduction in the cost of living. But we're going to see a significant escalation in the cost of living post April 12th, 2026.
Right. So a lot of the conversation so far, we've been speaking about the geopolitics, especially as it relates to the increasing cost of shipping and fuel, and that is a direct result of the current war with Iran. However, we have been also seeing tensions within the region. I think someone earlier mentioned, Merrick, you mentioned what we saw in terms of tourism and how we had that shutdown of our tourism plant for a day or two when the US invaded Venezuela. Closer to home, we are seeing the likelihood of something happening in Cuba also increasing. We have seen where, due to US pressures, a number of countries within the region have withdrew their medical program with Cuban doctors. Right here in Angola, we benefited from Cuban doctors during the COVID pandemic. Today, the BVI announced that they've not been asked to withdraw their Cuban relations with the doctors and nurses that they have there. But I don't think that we can ignore what is happening. Dr. Webster, what would you be recommending at this time as a contingency plan for the government of Anguilla should we see some pressures come our way, not having access to Cuban medical teams, and just in general, that conflict with Cuba and the US?
Well, you hit, a good point there that this is becoming a real issue in the Caribbean. And, it's a matter of survival, and that pressure has been put on to stop these programs with Cuba. In terms of Anguilla, we have not really had a big need, except during COVID. We had the 5 Cuban professionals here. We do now have, some of our doctors are of Cuban heritage. Don't know if they are still part of that exchange or that program where we have to, pay Cuba to have them. I'm not sure if that's the case right now. But be that as may, throughout the Caribbean, we all want, and we have to, when one of us, is having to deal with those pressures, all of us at some point have to take stock of what's going on. And we then have to, we have to train our own. And we feel that that is essential. And that is going to require that we, again, invest in our own people so that we have our own people trained in medicine and in nursing and other fields in medicine and healthcare so that we can fill that gap. And we know that it's going to take, in the case of nurses, it's going to take 4 or 5 years. And in terms of doctors, it's going to take, 7 to 10. So we need to start now, and we should have started already. And that's one of the things that we did. And we put more money into scholarships so that we can get our people interested in these subjects. We also, started the nurse assistant program at the Anguilla Community College. We also are working with, the UK in terms of having our nurses training at some of it online with universities in the UK, and then setting up areas where we could have those nurses do the practical and clinical part of their training, either in the UK or in the region where those services were available. So that is, I think that is something we need to work on immediately. Um, and then I know some of the other countries are looking at Africa, Antigua looking at Ghana to provide nursing services. We know that there are training programs in the region and certainly would have to be able to reach out. And I know that former Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, told me while I was Premier of Anguilla and Minister of Health that if we needed nurses, and that we could always reach out, to get in the case of need. We knew during COVID that we needed to have nurses. At one point, we were looking to bring in 16 nurses to provide the services necessary, whether at the hospital or when we opened our bubble program, and we needed nurses to be able to go to quarantine sites. This was an option, and so I think that all of us collectively, as the Caribbean, have to see where we have excesses and be able to have that migration, of our labor force. Um, that doesn't mean that I agree with free movement of peoples at CARICOM. I think Anguilla's in that unique situation, as with the BVI and others, that we have an administering power, the UK, and so we are governed by the British Nationality Act and things like that. But I do think that we have to be more flexible in terms of being able to supply each other in terms of the skills that are necessary. And then we reach out to other places that have, the Philippines, of course. I know that that's a source, India, to get help with our healthcare services.
Right, thank you. It's really interesting, especially when we consider the relation between Anguilla and Cuba. I grew up with my great grandmother who had a sister in Cuba. So we do have family ties, and we know that there are Anguillians with family ties in Cuba. And so just considering what is happening there, it is something to take into consideration. As we wrap up, and I did beg the producer for 30 more minutes, and so we have a very hard stop of 10 o'clock, so we have about 7 minutes, which means I can give each of you, well, no, 6 minutes, which means I can literally give each of you 45 seconds just to do a wrap up of tonight's conversation, where you'd like to see us going forward, both Anguilla and as a region. And yep, so Mr. Hughes.
Yeah, well, this has been a really, really good program. It shows that we have similar issues throughout the Caribbean, because we are speaking about Grenada, we're speaking of Barbados, we're speaking about Anguilla, and we have similar problems throughout the Caribbean. And it begs that our leaders start to look at the Caribbean collectively and start to have a comprehensive approach to the entire region: food security, energy security, freedom of movement, and so forth, because there must be some way in which we can move even more so through the Caribbean. I know some years ago, we were talking about a ferry service through the Caribbean, and we know that that is vulnerable because Trump could just get up in the morning and decide that's a drug trafficking boat and bomb you out of the water. So these are things that we have to consider. But food security, energy security, and in the case of Angola, developing a sovereign wealth fund, rethinking how we invest monies overseas, because it's not an investment that will have a return. How we spend money overseas rather than developing our social infrastructure and our physical infrastructure here at home. We must be able to take care of home first before we go elsewhere.
Thank you. Mr. Richardson?
Yes, thank you. Tonight's conversation was indeed. I became more of a listener because there was so many great ideas and the conversation was so great. I know in this program going forward and in other programs, we'll be able to dig in a lot deeper on some of the points that were discussed amongst especially our guests tonight. So I definitely did enjoy tonight and looking forward to build on the conversations that were started tonight. Thank you.
I'm happy to give you some reprieve, Mr. Richardson. I know you do a lot of heavy lifting on Mondays in the know. Mr. Hanley? Not sure if we lost Mr. Hanley. I know it is pretty late in the UK. Over to you. Oh, sorry. Okay, Mr. Hanley, you're still there.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was on mute.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for inviting me to the program this evening. Obviously, when you have a number of panelists, you're going to get varying views, which is good for conversation. It's good for debate, and I think it was a very worthwhile exercise. Very good discussions from our colleagues. It's good to hear that even though we're, separated by sea, the challenges we face in Barbados and in Grenada, and I'm sure all across the region, we have very similar issues. And it's good to see that we are more and more united than we actually think. And so it's good to hear that there's similar challenges all across the region. And I do believe that the solutions, again, can be found in the region. And if we were to only um, give CARICOM's meaning and the reason why it was put together, the real essence of it, and really truly make CARICOM the block that it should be, and utilize um, our strength and our numbers, then we can do a lot more as a region. But yes, again, a very good program. I thank all the folks who are here for their contributions. It certainly made me think about some of the comments, which is very good. And I thank each and every one for being a valuable part of the program this evening.
All right, thank you. Mr. Wickham?
Well, just quickly to say thanks again for the invitation. It is somewhat comforting in these times to know that we have Caribbean islands like Grenada and Anguilla that we're focused on tonight that have the same problem, and Barbados that have the same problems. So one could say that we can share our grief together. What's coming at us cumulatively is going to be I think it's a tsunami, an economic tsunami, frankly. This is something that we are completely ill prepared for, and I say we because we all are in a similar boat. And we need to come up with creative solutions in terms of the way forward. And I thought that a lot of the ideas that we raised tonight were interesting, were good food for thought. And I hope that we will be able to lean on some of these ideas as we go forward the next 6 to 8 months. I think it's going to be pretty rough for us in the region. But thanks again for the invitation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wickham. Thank you. And Dr. Webster?
Yes, certainly want to thank you for moderating. Thank Mr. Wickham and Mr. Campbell for being with us and joining us from the region. If we had such interesting conversation on the economy, I look forward to when we start discussing gun crime and violence in the region, because that is a major, black eye that we have on our societies. And I know that Mr. Wickham, his insights will be helpful, in terms of he having, being a researcher and also statistician to see how this is, what that's costing us in terms of our economic progress. And certainly the loss of life of our young men, especially, is one that we can never quantify. That. So I look forward to those discussions later, and I'm putting Mr. Wickham on the spot that we'll be calling him back, and hopefully he'll be available like he was tonight to help us out. Thank you again for this opportunity to have this discussion, and that our Caribbean brothers and sisters are available to so that we all can look at these issues collectively and make the necessary steps. I want to thank everyone for listening and for participating in this APM online program. And I want to thank you, Geneva, and the producer, and our man who's always there, Miss Ivan Marenga, Kana, for making it happen. Thanks again, and looking forward to the next program.
All right. Thank you. And good night, everyone. I think we have given persons quite a bit to chew on. And as we move forward and continue these conversations, as Hayden said, April 12th could possibly be D-Day for us here within the region. And we continue these conversations so that our Caribbean leaders, our leaders here in Anguilla, can properly prepare our people for the challenges that are to come. So we are solutions driven, and have a pleasant night, and looking forward to continuing the conversation next week. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
And I would say good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
All right.
All right.